Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. I am so far the first person that I know of who had their faith demolished by Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. For those of you that might not remember this classic from 21 years ago, there's a scene that takes place in hell that is a parody of the entire premise of The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman, which when I found this out, I went out and rented. When I sat down to watch The Seventh Seal, I was a born-again Christian. By the time the movie was over, I wasn't anymore. Pretty much because of one line. There's a scene early on where Max von Sydow says to the angel of death, "We are to fashion an image out of our own terror, and we call that image God." I watched that scene like 6 times, and when it was over, I knew that I would never be a Christian again. I felt the full weight of the emptiness of the universe all at once. And I woke up that morning thinking, knowing that I was saved for all eternity. One dumb stoner comedy and one pretentious Swedish art film were not enough to entirely quell all of my spiritual seeking. And years later, I would discover, kind of entirely to my surprise, that I was a Buddhist. And I know. And while my faith in Christianity was born and died in an instant, my faith in this has taken years to develop and has withstood every test to which I put it. Tests like a few weeks ago when I thought my mother was dying. Cancer of the pancreas. If I thought there was anyone who'd listen, I would offer up a hymn of praise that, yes, she's sick, yes, she needs big, scary procedures, but she's not going to die right away. And, well, I've been here, and I should have been there months ago. Well, I've been here in Arizona, she's been in upstate New York, sick with a litany of things, and asking when I'm coming home. And I make what we both know are excuses. It's the members of her congregation who pick up the slack. They drive her around, they make sure she eats, they listen to her complain. Capital C Christians doing what Jesus would do, because I haven't been there. So, even though I don't think anyone hears their prayers with themselves, and I don't think they or anyone anywhere needs to be saved from anything because there's no such thing as sin, when I'm back there in New York, like I was in early May, I go to her church and I mutter words that I still remember and smile at people with names that I don't remember, each one of them attached to a story about a doctor's visit or a bag of groceries that was my responsibility. Well, one Sunday that I was back there, May 5th, was communion. I wasn't bothered so much by the kind of silly goriness of the idea. It was more that a few of these people that I both admired and patronized must believe that something really sacred was happening. I thought about how I felt taking the sacraments when I was a believer, and for me to share that with them after what they've done for my mother and I haven't would dishonor them. It also happens to be very, very against the rules to take the sacraments if you're not in good standing with the church. But how to explain all of this to a sick woman and her good-hearted friends who I decided they can't read my mind. If I think it's meaningless, then maybe it's meaningless that I do it, and no one will ever know. And in this case, breaking the rules is the lesser sin, I suppose. So, for the first time in years, I take communion. Body of Christ broken for me. Blood of Christ shed for me. I wondered if a miracle would happen. It didn't. I didn't burst into flames. But something else happened. Within about 40 minutes, I was experiencing some of the worst digestive distress that I've experienced in years. By my second trip to the toilet, it occurred to me that either there was a God who was punishing me, or that my evil body could not abide even the idea of holiness and was violently forcing it out of me in the opposite direction. That same day, I also had to go check on my childhood home, which used to to be my father's house before he died, which I've rented out since he died. I'd been there before, but on that particular day, it was the first time in my life that I walked to the door of my childhood home and knocked like a guest and waited to be let in. And I knew in that moment that, while it's my house legally, it's not my home anymore, and it wouldn't ever be again. So it's Cinco de Mayo. I drive back to my mother's house to make guacamole. I'd even been making plans to go on a date that evening, but with all the liquid evil coming out the back of me, I was looking for a way to cancel without going into that level of detail because I am a classy fucking gentleman. That's when the rabbi calls. A little bit of backstory. My mother's father was a pretty evil dude. After getting expelled from the seminary, he marries a Jewish orphan named Sadie and thinks the godly thing to do is to change her name to Sally and forbid her from practicing her faith. When he wants to divorce her and marry a virgin like a good Catholic, he forces my mother to go before the church and tell lies about her mother. His death at his home, surrounded by his family, was 13 years ago exactly to this day. I was there. I watched it happen. I made sure. Obviously, I am not a Christian. I am also not a Jew, but I also am. Because my grandmother was Jewish and she begat a daughter who begat me, I am of the community of the Jewish people no matter what I choose to believe. And to be honest, it's had an effect on me outside of all proportion. I love the music. I love the food. I love how every self-identified Jew I've ever talked to about this has been so open about the things that we can just never understand about God and about human life. I still think that it's superstitious patriarchal nonsense that I would never consider myself a part of. But I would be lying to you if I stood here and said that I could escape that there's something in my blood that just gets it and wants to understand more. So when my grandmother died, her niece sent to my mother, the geographically closest rabbi from 2 hours away. He left a mezuzah on her door that's still there. Since then, he's called her 3-4 times a year, just asking how she is, asking how her children are, asking if there's anything he can do. This has been going on for 8 years, after meeting her once. So anyway, so I'm chopping avocados when this man calls. Happy Cinco de Mayo, he totally does not say. But he is driving through the area. He knows it's late and totally unexpected. Would my mother be up for a visit? He starts confirming the address when she tells him that I'm there. Armed with my new, less literally shitty excuse, I text my potential date. This is going to be at least one of the more novel delay excuses you'll get this month. When he arrives, I have to say that I like the old man instantly. He seems mainly interested in talking to me and about what ways I relate to my Jewish heritage. He doesn't blink when I tell him that I'm a queer deist Buddhist. He gives me a yarmulke. He drops these amazing one-liners like, God is everything, but not everything is God. So, and then he wants to ask me a question, and somehow I knew from the phone call it was going to come to this. He wants a blowjob. No, he's I'm kidding. He wants to know if I would mind doing a ritual with him. He takes pains to say more than once that it's just past the right side of sundown for this to be quite within the rules, but he really feels that it's called for given the circumstances. After the day I've had, what could I possibly say? Even if the blowjob would actually be less weird. What would you say? Observant Jewish men sometimes wear on their arms and heads the tefillin, a box containing scripture from the Torah bound with black leather. I've seen pictures, but my first time seeing one in person is as the rabbi is threading it up my arm and around my fingers. Before he begins, I ask if I should wash my hands, and he looks at me like I have spontaneously started speaking perfect Hebrew. He speaks, I repeat, he speaks, I repeat. I am sitting there in my living room with a box of words tied to my body, parroting other words about the oneness of God and the salvation out of Egypt that I don't believe and I don't understand, but then again, isn't it the height of arrogance to think that I could ever be sure? Later that evening, I would learn that there's a prohibition against doing the tefillin ritual if someone has any kind of stomach upset. Stomach upset that I got from the communion that I also wasn't supposed to receive. I can't bring myself to believe in this man's God, but like the churchgoers, he's demonstrated an uncommon charity and goodness. He's probably too modest to call it a mitzvah, so I'll do it for him. Sometimes I think that the people in my mother's church must be deceiving themselves or insane to think that a bit of bread soaked in wine and guilt and wishes is anything other than that, but they've helped keep her fed and healthy at a time when I couldn't or wouldn't do it. So as you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. Unfortunately, I still believe that we fashion an image out of our own terror and call that image God, but is it possible that I'm starting to believe in the people? On May 5th of this year, 13 years after I watched a man die for the first time, in the morning I stood with Christians and witnessed as they were allowed to experience a miracle. In the afternoon, ownership of my childhood home lost in 3 wraps in a drawer. In the evening, a very strange old man covered my head, bound my arm with relics, and spoke words of power and deliverance beyond understanding. In between, I shit a whole hell of a lot. The story doesn't end the way it should, I guess. There's not really any miracles. My mother was still sick, I still had diarrhea. There's still evil in the world, and I still don't know what to make of it. I can't still reconcile the goodness of individuals with the cruelty of the groups that those individuals make up. I can't reconcile the cruelty of societies with the surpassing and ineffable beauty of the world those societies inhabit and the fabric of the universe of which that world is only the tiniest part. 2 whole theologies make a huge play for my soul in one day, and I still make jokes about poop. The closest I can get to putting it all into words is this. A door that I had slammed shut and bolted, creaked open just the littlest bit. And while I still can't believe that there's a heaven or a pure lands or a Shemayim where I will live forever with my grandmother and my father and one day my mother, I just know in the soul that I still, despite all rational evidence to the contrary, believe myself to have, that tiny, almost invisible crack lets in a light, however faint, that will not be kept out completely. And at least my stomach is doing better now. God be with you. L'chaim. Namaste.